Imagine boarding a plane, ticket in hand, seat assignment clear. You did everything right. But instead of being welcomed, you're told you don't belong. What would you do? Would you stay silent to avoid conflict? Or would you stand your ground, even as the entire cabin watches? This is the story of Dr. Selena Carter, a woman who carried quiet strength into the skies. What began as a humiliating confrontation over a first-class seat spiraled into something far greater, a test of dignity, a clash of power, and a reckoning that would shake the entire airline industry. Why did the crew target her? What happens when a passenger everyone underestimates turns out to hold more power than anyone imagined? And how can one person's refusal to move ignite a movement seen around the world? Stay with me, because this isn't just a flight. It's a fight for respect, justice, and humanity at 30,000 feet. If you believe stories like this need to be told, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's begin the journey. The boarding area smelled faintly of espresso and jet fuel, an oddly comforting mix that always made Dr. Selena Carter feel steady. She rolled her modest black suitcase toward the jet bridge, her passport tucked neatly into her leather folio. The overhead screen flashed, Flight 827, New York to Los Angeles, boarding first class. Her ticket was in order. She had flown dozens of times this year. Yet, she still paused for a breath before handing her pass to the gate agent. Years of lived experience had taught her that sometimes, no matter how much she had earned her place, someone would look at her and decide otherwise. The agent scanned the code, offered a mechanical smile, and waved her forward. For once, no hesitation. Selena allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief and stepped onto the jet bridge, the hum of the engines vibrating faintly under her feet. Inside the cabin, the lighting glowed a soft amber. Plush leather seats curved gracefully along the aisle, polished trays gleaming under the downlights. She slid gracefully into seat 2A, the window seat she had chosen deliberately. Window seats always gave her a sense of control, a boundary she could lean against when the world felt unpredictable. She tucked her folio into the side pocket, pulled out a small journal, and opened it to a blank page. A fine point pen tapped softly as she thought. On one corner of the page, she scribbled, "Strength is quiet." Selena's mother used to whisper that to her every morning before school. Strength is quiet, not in shouting, not in proving, but in knowing. Selena carried that phrase like armor. It was her reminder that dignity was not given by others. It was maintained from within. As passengers filed into the cabin, she allowed herself to observe. A businessman across the aisle typed furiously on his laptop. A young couple in 3C and 3D argued softly about who would get the window. A college-age girl, slim, bright-eyed, slipped into 4A, phone already raised, filming snippets for what Selena assumed would be a stream of online content. Selena smiled faintly. Life was normal here, in these first moments. No one stared too long. No one asked her to prove who she was. She placed her journal on the tray table and exhaled, closing her eyes briefly. But the calm was fragile. She felt it before it happened a pair of eyes on her, lingering. Opening her eyes, she found a flight attendant standing just a few feet away. Young, blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun, uniform crisp and spotless. The name tag read Lindsay Harper. Lindsay's gaze was sharp, not hostile exactly, but evaluating, scanning Selena as if something about her presence was out of place. Selena knew that look. It was the same look she'd received in boardrooms, at luxury hotels, even at gala dinners where she had been the keynote speaker. The look that asked silently, "Do you belong here?" Selina shifted slightly in her seat, straightened her posture, and offered a gentle smile. "Good evening," she said softly. Lindsay hesitated, then replied, "Evening." Her eyes dropped to Selina's boarding pass, which lay half-tucked into the journal. Selina calmly closed the journal and slid the pass out of sight. The attendant lingered another beat before moving on. Selina's heart gave a single hard thump, but her face remained serene. She had learned long ago not to give that flicker of doubt any oxygen. Still, she tapped her pen softly against the edge of her journal. 1, 2, 3 taps like a metronome, keeping time with her pulse. Minutes passed, boarding continued, announcements hummed overhead. The pilot's voice crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 827. We'll be pushing back in approximately 15 minutes. Selina allowed herself to settle again. She tilted her head toward the window. The tarmac outside was alive with flashing lights and rolling carts, a choreography she had always admired. She thought of her work waiting in Los Angeles, another conference, another room where she would stand before hundreds, speaking about the future of equitable leadership. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant, Safe Travels. "Dr. Carter, remember, your keynote is at 11 a.m. LA time." She typed back, "Thank you. See you tomorrow." The hum of the engines deepened. Passengers shuffled. Overhead bins clicked shut. Selina closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself in the quiet before the storm she did not yet know was coming. Her mind wandered to her father's voice, deep and steady. "Selina, dignity is not negotiable. They can question your seat, your right to be somewhere, even your name, but they cannot touch your dignity unless you give it away." She pressed her palm lightly against the journal, as if to lock those words onto the page. A faint cough drew her attention. Lindsay was back, hovering near the front of the cabin, eyes flicking toward her again. This time, Lindsay whispered something to another flight attendant, who then looked at Selina as well. Selina's chest tightened. A storm cloud was forming, quiet and distant, but inevitable. Still, she did not react. She turned another page in her journal and wrote, "Slowly, in careful script, dignity is the baseline. Always." The engines roared louder. The seatbelt sign chimed. Passengers around her adjusted their belongings, buckled straps, prepared for flight. Selina remained still, pen in hand, her gaze fixed on the words she had written. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed her lips move slightly as she whispered to herself, "Strength is quiet." And in that moment, before the storm broke, Selina Carter was the very embodiment of stillness, a calm sea hiding a tide that, once it turned, would not be stopped. The seatbelt sign had not yet gone off when Selina felt the unmistakable presence of someone standing over her again. She looked up slowly, expecting perhaps another passenger needing assistance with a bag. Instead, it was Lindsay Harper, the same attendant whose eyes had lingered on her during boarding. Lindsay's smile was tight, professional only on the surface. Her voice, though measured, carried an undertone of suspicion. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass again?" Selina tilted her head. She had already scanned through the gate. She had already taken her seat, placed her folio, buckled her belt. Still, she remained composed. Without sighing or rolling her eyes, she reached calmly for the folio and withdrew the pass. Lindsay took it between her manicured fingers, glanced at the name, then at the seat number. Her brow furrowed. "Seat 2A, first class," she murmured, almost as though repeating it would make it less true. Selina waited. The attendant leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Are you sure this is your ticket? First class is reserved. We have procedures to follow. I'll need to verify this with my supervisor." Selina's pen was still resting on the open journal. She tapped it once against the paper. A sound so soft it could have been mistaken for a sigh. Her eyes never left Lindsay's face. "It is my ticket," she said gently. "Please, go ahead and verify." Something in her calmness unsettled Lindsay, who hesitated a second before walking briskly toward the galley. Around Selina. The cabin seemed to grow more attentive. A businessman across the aisle looked up from his laptop. The young woman with the phone in 4A angled her camera just slightly, recording discreetly. Selina noticed it, but did not flinch. Moments later, Lindsay returned, this time accompanied by a taller woman with sharp cheekbones and an air of practiced authority. Her badge read, "Karen Whitmore, Cabin Supervisor." Karen offered a quick smile that did not reach her eyes. "Dr. Carter, is it?" she asked, though the boarding pass was still in her hand. "Yes," Selina replied evenly. Karen nodded, folding her arms. "There seems to be a discrepancy with your ticket. We just need you to step out into the jet bridge while we sort this out." Selina's voice was soft, but it carried. "What discrepancy?" Karen glanced at Lindsay, who shrugged as though it were obvious. "It's standard procedure. Sometimes fraud occurs. Sometimes people sit in the wrong section. We simply need to confirm." Selina tapped the pen again, steady as a clock. "I have already confirmed. At the gate. My ticket is valid. This is my assigned seat." Karen's lips tightened. Her voice grew firmer. "Ma'am, if you don't comply, you may be subject to removal. We need cooperation for the safety of all passengers." The word removal hung in the air like smoke. The businessman closed his laptop. The couple in 3C and 3D stopped whispering. Emily Zhao in 4A adjusted her camera, no longer hiding the fact that she was filming. Selina inhaled through her nose, slow and measured. Inside her, a storm was forming. She remembered nights at her mother's kitchen table, listening to stories of humiliation endured quietly so as not to lose jobs, not to cause scenes. Her mother had always said, "Pick your battles, Selina. But when you do pick one, stand like a mountain." This was one of those moments. She looked at Karen. "I am seated where I belong. If you believe otherwise, please bring the captain here." Karen blinked, as though caught off guard by the request. "The captain is preparing for departure. He cannot be disturbed with seating issues." "Then bring the gate manager," Selina replied. Her tone never rose, never broke, "because I am not leaving this seat without clarity." Karen's cheeks flushed. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a hiss that still carried to the nearby passengers. "You are obstructing the boarding process. This is not optional." Selina opened her journal, wrote a single line. "Dignity is not optional either," then closed it with care. Her eyes lifted again. "I am calm. I am seated. And I am not obstructing anything." Karen's jaw tightened. She motioned to Lindsay, who stepped toward the interphone. The soft chime echoed, calling for security. Gas rippled through the cabin. Emily's voice whispered, almost too low to hear, "This is wrong. Don't worry." "Ma'am, I'm recording." Selina's pulse pounded in her ears. She tapped the pen against the journal again, a rhythm to keep her centered. In her chest, a battle raged. Part of her wanted to stand, to shout, to demand respect. But another part whispered restraint. Strength is quiet. Her father's voice. Her mother's voice, braided together inside her. Karen straightened, folding her arms. "Security will be here shortly to escort you out. It's for everyone's safety." Selina almost smiled. Safety. The word used so often to disguise discomfort, to excuse humiliation. She had heard it before. She would hear it again, but not this time. Instead, she leaned back into her seat, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered under her breath, just loud enough for herself, "Strength is quiet." When she opened her eyes, Lindsay and Karen were both staring at her, expecting protest, maybe begging for a scene to justify their actions. But all they saw was composure, stillness, and the quiet certainty of someone who knew she belonged. The minutes stretched. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged nervous glances. Others muttered. The tension was no longer just between Selina and the crew. It had become the atmosphere of the cabin itself. Emily Zhao whispered again, "They can't do this. Not to you." Selina turned slightly, meeting the young woman's eyes. For the first time, she spoke with warmth instead of restraint. "They can try," she said softly, "but the truth doesn't move." The words, simple as they were, seemed to resonate. The businessman nodded quietly, though he said nothing. Even the couple behind her grew still, their earlier bickering forgotten. Lindsay's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her badge. Karen remained rigid, but Selina noticed the faintest flicker of doubt in her eyes. The jet bridge door opened, and the heavy steps of security approached. The storm was coming closer. Selina straightened, pen still in hand, journal on her lap. Her heartbeat quickened, but her face remained calm. She had chosen her battle. Now she would stand like a mountain. The hush in the cabin was heavy, broken only by the shuffle of leather shoes on the jet bridge. 2 uniformed security officers entered, their presence commanding instant silence. The atmosphere thickened, passengers holding their breath as though watching a stage play reach its climax. Selina Carter kept her gaze fixed on her journal, her pen resting across the line she had last written. She did not move. The officers approached with practiced neutrality, their expressions carefully blank, though Selina saw curiosity flicker in their eyes as they registered the scene. Karen Whitmore stepped forward quickly, her voice crisp and authoritative. "This passenger is refusing to comply with boarding procedure. She needs to be escorted out for verification." One of the officers, a stocky man with graying temples, looked from Karen to Selina. "Ma'am, may I ask your cooperation if you'll step outside with us? We can resolve this quickly." Selina lifted her eyes, calm and unhurried. "My ticket is valid. This is my seat." Her voice was low, even, the words delivered with a certainty that made several passengers stir. Karen's face tightened. "She is obstructing the process. We cannot depart until she complies." The second officer, younger and clearly less comfortable, shifted his weight. "Dr. Carter, we're just trying to avoid a scene." Selina tapped her pen softly against the leather of her folio. Once, twice, 3 times. "The scene," she said softly, "was created when I was accused without evidence." Gasps rippled again. Emily Zhao's phone, lifted higher now, captured every second. Her live-stream comments scrolled rapidly across the screen, emojis of shock, anger, and support flooding in. Lindsay Harper, standing just behind Karen, crossed her arms. "First class isn't for everyone," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The words struck the cabin like a slap. A mother in row 3 gasped audibly. The businessman shook his head in disbelief. Selina felt the sting, sharp as glass. but she did not allow it to pierce her composure. She closed her journal gently, setting the pen across it like a sword laid to rest. Her inner voice pressed against her chest, hot and insistent. Stand up, shout back, show them who you are. But another voice, quieter and stronger, reminded her strength is quiet. She breathed deeply, met Lindsay's eyes for a moment, and then looked back to the officers. I am seated lawfully. If you choose to remove me, the world will see it, and they will know why. Emily's voice, trembling but firm, carried across the row. We already do. Karen snapped her head toward the girl. Turn that off. Emily clutched her phone tighter. No, she said softly. People deserve to see this. The younger officer exhaled slowly, clearly uncomfortable. The older one rubbed the bridge of his nose, sensing the weight of the moment. Karen, he said carefully, maybe we should. But Karen cut him off. No, she is obstructing. Procedure is clear. She must be reseated or removed. She turned back to Selina, her voice sharp as steel. You can move to economy now, or you can be escorted out. Those are your options. Selina's chest tightened. For a fleeting second, the temptation to comply flickered, to stand, to walk back through the stairs, to avoid the escalation. She imagined the humiliation, the whispers, the shame her mother had endured in years past when doors had been slammed shut for no reason except the color of her skin. Her inner struggle rose. Is this worth it? Is this seat worth the fight? But then she thought of her work, of the young women she mentored, of every lecture where she told them that dignity was not negotiable. To give in now would be to betray not just herself, but the principle she lived by. She looked squarely at Karen. I will not move to economy. This is my seat. Her voice carried no anger, no tremor, only the steady resonance of truth. Karen's nostrils flared. Lindsay shifted uncomfortably, her earlier smugness cracking. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. The businessman leaned forward, his voice measured but firm. I saw her board. She belongs here. This isn't right. Another passenger chimed in. Let her sit. We all just want to leave. Support began to ripple, quiet but undeniable. Karen, unwilling to lose control, straightened to her full height. Security. Proceed. The younger officer hesitated. Ma'am, maybe the captain should. The captain is busy. Karen snapped. Do your job. Selina felt the eyes of the entire cabin pressing against her. She sensed the storm's edge, the moment before the sky split open. Her heart pounded like a drum, yet outwardly she remained still. She tapped the journal again, her secret rhythm of restraint. The older officer leaned closer, lowering his voice. Dr. Carter, please, this isn't the place. Selina's reply was soft but cutting. It is exactly the place. If dignity can be stripped in public, then justice must be restored in public too. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Emily's live stream caught them, her comments exploding with support. Karen's face burned crimson. She turned sharply, retreating to the galley to make another call. Lindsay followed, whispering furiously. The officers stepped back, uncertain, caught between orders and conscience. Selina allowed herself one long, steady breath. Her inner voice calmed, settling back into stillness. She looked out the window at the glow of the tarmac lights, whispering to herself. Strength is quiet, but deep within, she knew the storm was far from over. The cabin was no longer just a place of quiet anticipation before a flight. It had become a stage. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every flicker of a phone camera lens carried the weight of judgment. Selina Carter could feel it pressing in from all directions. The two officers lingered near the aisle, hesitant, caught between the sharp authority of Karen Whitmore and the still presence of the woman in seat 2A. Their radios crackled softly, reminders of the chain of command waiting just beyond the cabin door. Karen returned from the galley, her expression hardened like stone. Lindsay trailed behind her, face pale, the earlier confidence now dimmed. Karen lifted her chin, scanning the cabin as though challenging anyone to oppose her authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced loudly, "we apologize for the delay. We are addressing a compliance matter. We appreciate your patience." The words hung false, heavy with implication. Passengers shifted uneasily, their murmurs growing louder. The businessman across the aisle muttered, "Compliance matter? My foot," but he said it under his breath. Selina sat motionless, her journal resting on her lap, her hands folded neatly atop it. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, the heat rising in her chest. Humiliation tried to claw its way inside her, to remind her that she was being reduced to a problem, a disruption, a body to be moved. Her mind whispered back, "You are not the disruption. You are the storm they fear." Karen turned back toward her, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Dr. Carter, this is your final opportunity. Step into the jet bridge so we can verify your ticket, or you will be removed." Selina lifted her gaze slowly, meeting Karen's eyes. "Removed," she repeated quietly, as though tasting the word. She thought of her father, a man who had been told countless times in his career that he didn't belong in certain spaces. She thought of her mother, who had once been pulled aside at an airport and forced to empty her purse in front of strangers. Each memory tightened like a knot in her chest. She inhaled, steady and deliberate. "My boarding pass was scanned. My seat is valid. I am not leaving." Karen's jaw flexed. Lindsay shifted nervously. The younger officer cleared his throat. Maybe we should get the Captain. Karen's glare sliced through him, silencing the suggestion. The businessman leaned forward, voice stronger this time. "She's right. I watched her board. She belongs here. Why are we wasting time?" Emily Zhao, her phone steady in her hand, added, "Thousands of people are watching this live. They see what's happening." Karen's head snapped toward her. "Put that phone away." Emily shook her head, voice trembling but resolute. "No, not until you stop treating her like she doesn't belong." A ripple of agreement moved through the cabin. A woman in row 5 nodded firmly. Another passenger muttered, "This is ridiculous." For the first time, Karen's authority faltered, her eyes darting across the rows as if measuring the weight of the crowd. Yet she pressed on, clinging to the rules that had always shielded her decisions. "This is about safety," she said loudly, her tone almost desperate now. "We cannot compromise safety." Selina's laugh was soft, but it carried. Heads turned toward her. She shook her head slightly. "Safety," she repeated, the word heavy with irony. "You use it as a shield when what you mean is comfort. Whose comfort? Not mine. Not anyone who looks like me." The cabin grew still. Even the officers seemed frozen, waiting for what would happen next. Karen bristled. "You are obstructing this flight. If you do not comply, you will be escorted off immediately." Selina closed her eyes, tapping her journal once with her fingertip. She could feel her mother's voice, whispering through time. "Pick your battles, Selina, and when you do, stand like a mountain." When she opened her eyes, she looked not at Karen, but at the passengers. Every person here knows what is happening. You know what words were spoken. You know what eyes judged me before I even sat down. The silence was thick, unbroken. Even the engines outside seemed muted. Emily whispered, "We know." Karen's face flushed. Her hand trembled as she gestured to the officers. "Proceed." The older officer hesitated. "Ma'am, with respect, this isn't right. The passengers are." "Do it," Karen snapped. The younger officer stepped forward uncertainly, his hand hovering near Selina's armrest. His eyes met hers, and for a moment he faltered. He saw no aggression in her, no disruption, only a woman seated firmly, quietly, with a strength that unnerved him. Selina spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but clear enough for the cabin to hear. "If you remove me, you will not just remove me. You will reveal yourselves. The world will see, and the world will not forget." The younger officer froze. His hand dropped to his side. He glanced at his partner, who shook his head slightly. Karen's voice cracked with frustration. "Fine. I'll bring the captain myself." She spun on her heel, storming toward the cockpit. Lindsay hurried after her, whispering frantically. As the door shut behind them, a collective exhale moved through the cabin. Passengers leaned back, whispers spreading like wildfire. Selina remained still, her journal resting against her palm. Inside, her heart raced, her muscles tensed as though bracing for impact. But outwardly, she was the mountain her mother had taught her to be. The businessman leaned closer across the aisle. "You handled that better than anyone I've ever seen. Most people would have lost it." Selina gave him a small, tired smile. Most people shouldn't have to handle it at all. Emily's phone buzzed with notifications, the live stream climbing into the tens of thousands. "They're calling you a hero already," she whispered. Selina shook her head gently. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone refusing to give away her dignity." The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the soft chime of the intercom signaling a delay announcement. But no one moved. The passengers sat in uneasy solidarity, waiting for what would come next. Selina closed her journal and pressed her palm against it as if sealing the moment inside. She whispered to herself, too softly for anyone else to hear. "Strength is quiet, always quiet." But even as she whispered it, she knew the quiet strength was about to collide with something far louder. And when it did, the storm would finally break. The cabin door opened with a hiss, and Karen Whitmore returned, her posture stiffer than before. Behind her walked the captain, his navy blue uniform pressed to perfection, cap tucked neatly under his arm. His name tag read Captain James Aldridge, a man with decades of experience etched into the lines of his face. The murmurs in the cabin hushed into silence. For many passengers, the captain's presence was the ultimate authority. His very arrival carried weight, the promise of resolution, or at least closure. Karen gestured toward Selina as though presenting evidence. "This is the passenger obstructing departure. Captain, she refuses to comply with seat verification." Captain Aldridge studied Selina for a moment. His eyes flicked to the journal on her lap, the calm set of her shoulders, the unwavering gaze she held. There was no disorder here, no chaos, only tension, tightly coiled. "Dr. Carter, is it?" he asked, his tone professional but cautious. "Yes," Selina replied. Karen stepped forward quickly. "She won't step out to verify. She refuses to move. She's delaying the entire flight." The captain lifted a hand to silence her. His gaze remained fixed on Selina. "Ma'am, Can you explain what's going on from your perspective? Selina inhaled slowly. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, the judgment, the whispers. This was the moment that so many before her had crumbled under the moment when authority was called to settle what prejudice had ignited. My ticket was scanned at the gate, she said evenly. It assigned me seat 2A. I am seated in 2A. There is no error, Karen interjected sharply. With respect, Captain, we have reason to believe reason. Selina's voice cut softly but firmly through the air. Or assumption. The passengers shifted in their seats. Emily Zhao's camera caught the exchange, her live stream comments exploding. She's right. They're profiling her. This is unbelievable. Stay strong, lady. Captain Aldridge glanced at Karen, then back to Selina. Ma'am, sometimes mistakes happen. With ticketing, I understand this is uncomfortable, but would you be willing to step out so we can double-check? The request was gentler than Karen's, but the impact was the same. It was an invitation to humiliation, dressed in politeness. Selina's chest tightened. She thought of her keynote speech waiting in Los Angeles. She thought of the faces of young women she had mentored, women who looked like her, who watched her as proof that dignity could be preserved in a world determined to strip it away. Her inner voice screamed, "Stand! Don't give them the satisfaction." Another voice, quieter but insidious, whispered, "It's just a seat. Spare yourself. Spare the shame." She closed her eyes briefly. For a fleeting moment, she imagined herself rising, walking down the aisle, every pair of eyes following her like a verdict. She imagined the live stream caption, "Black woman dragged from first-class seat." Her stomach churned. But then she remembered her mother's words, her father's counsel. Pick your battles, and when you do, stand like a mountain. Selina opened her eyes. Captain, with all respect, I will not leave this seat. My boarding pass is valid. My presence is valid. What you are asking is not about safety. It is about assumption. The captain's jaw tightened. Karen seized the opening, her voice sharp. She's non-compliant. You see it yourself. The older security officer spoke up quietly, his tone heavy with reluctance. Captain, I don't see her being disruptive. She's seated calmly. The passengers don't seem to support removal. A murmur of agreement passed through the cabin. The businessman leaned forward, speaking louder this time. She belongs here. You're targeting her. Everyone can see it. Karen shot him a glare, but it was too late. The tide of the cabin had turned. Selina sat straighter, her voice soft, but carrying across the rows. This isn't just about me. Every person watching knows that if I were someone else, this would not be happening. The words struck like a bell. Heads nodded. Emily whispered into her phone. She said it. She said exactly what we're all thinking. Captain Aldridge exhaled, the weight of authority pressing down on him. He turned to Karen. What specific discrepancy do you have with her ticket? Karen faltered. The system flagged. The system, Selina interrupted gently, did not stop me at the gate. The system scanned me through. The system did not speak to me the way your staff has. This is not about the system. Silence. For the first time, Karen looked unsettled. Lindsay shifted beside her, eyes darting to the floor. The captain pressed his lips together. Dr. Carter, I need to ensure this flight departs smoothly, but I also cannot ignore what I see here. He turned to Karen. Suspend the verification for now. We'll resolve this after takeoff. Karen's face flushed deep red. Captain, that's an order, he said firmly. Relief rippled through the cabin. A few passengers even clapped softly, though the tension still lingered like static in the air. Selina felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Her body wanted to slump, to exhale everything at once, but she held her posture. She could not let them see collapse. Not yet. Her inner voice whispered, "You stood. You did not move. You did not yield." But another whisper followed, more fragile. "This isn't over. They will come again." The captain gave her a curt nod before retreating to the cockpit. Karen and Lindsay followed stiffly, their frustration trailing behind them like smoke. The officers stepped back, uncertain but relieved to avoid escalation. Selina placed her palm against her journal, grounding herself in the familiar leather. Her heart still pounded, but her face was calm, her breathing steady. Emily leaned forward, whispering softly, "You were incredible. Everyone's talking about it online. They're saying you're brave." Selina offered her a small smile. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding what matters more. The businessman across the aisle nodded. "Whatever happens next, you've already won something. You didn't let them diminish you?" Selina's gaze drifted toward the window, where the runway lights twinkled against the night sky. She whispered so only she could hear, "Strength is quiet." The engines roared faintly as the aircraft prepared to taxi. But in Selina's chest, the storm still churned. She knew this was only a pause, a breath before the next wave. And when it came, she would need to be ready not just for herself, but for every person who saw in her a reflection of their own struggle. She tapped her journal once, twice, 3 times. Then she closed her eyes and waited. The plane had begun to taxi slowly toward the runway, but the air in the first-class cabin was so tense it felt frozen in place. Karen Whitmore had returned from the cockpit with Lindsay trailing behind her. Though the captain had ordered the matter suspended until after takeoff, Karen's face told everyone she wasn't finished. Her lips were tight, her jaw rigid, and when she stopped beside Selina Carter's seat, she spoke loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this passenger has refused to comply with instructions. For the safety of this flight, she may be subject to removal upon the captain's final decision." The words rang out like a gavel. Conversations cut off. Dozens of eyes turned toward Selina, some sympathetic, some wary, all watching. Selina felt the words land like stones against her chest. Removal, safety, always the same words, recycled to justify humiliation. She breathed in slowly, fingers tracing the edge of her journal as if it were the edge of a shield. "Emily Zhao," her phone camera pointed directly at the scene, spoke up. Everyone just heard that. She's not a threat. She's not raising her voice. She's sitting in her paid seat. Karen turned sharply toward her. "Miss, you need to stop recording immediately." Emily held her ground. "No, people deserve to see what's happening." The businessman across the aisle closed his laptop with a snap. "She has every right to record, and Dr. Carter has every right to be here." Murmurs of agreement spread. A woman in row 5 shook her head and whispered, "This is shameful." Another passenger muttered, "Always the same story." Karen's composure cracked. Her voice grew sharper, louder. "You are all misunderstanding. This is not about discrimination. This is about compliance with protocol. If passengers refuse to comply, flights cannot operate safely." Selina's voice, soft but clear, cut through the tension. "Safety isn't the issue here. I complied with every step. I boarded with a valid ticket. I am seated in the seat assigned to me. The only thing questioned has been me." The words carried a resonance that even Karen could not ignore. Passengers leaned forward, hanging on the exchange. Emily's phone buzzed with comments scrolling faster than she could read. "She's brilliant. This is history unfolding. We're with her." Selina felt the storm inside her pressing against her ribs, begging to break free. The humiliation of being singled out in front of strangers. The sting of being reduced to a problem, a disruption. It was almost too much to bear. But she steadied herself with one thought: if I bend now. The lesson they learn is that silence is acceptable. Karen, sensing control slipping, gestured toward the security officers who still lingered uneasily at the back of the cabin. "Escort her out now," she ordered, her voice nearly cracking with urgency. The younger officer took a step forward, but the older one lifted a hand. His voice was low but firm. "With respect. Ma'am, we don't see cause for removal. She's calm. She's not a threat." Karen's cheeks flushed red. "She's obstructing the crew." Selina replied quietly, but every passenger heard her. "The crew is obstructing dignity." The cabin erupted in gasps and murmurs. A few passengers clapped softly, defiant. Emily's stream spiked, comments flashing like sparks mic-drop. "She's unstoppable. This is bigger than a seat." Selina looked around, her eyes meeting those of strangers who had become witnesses, allies, an audience she had never sought but now carried. Her voice steadied as she spoke again. "Every one of you knows what is happening. If I were someone else, if I looked different, we would already be airborne. Instead, we sit here debating whether I deserve to remain where I paid to sit." Her words struck the cabin like thunder. Even Lindsay looked shaken, her eyes flicking nervously between Karen and the passengers. The businessman raised his hand slightly. "She's right. Enough is enough. Let her be." Another voice chimed in. "Louder. We all paid for our seats. Why is she the only one being challenged?" The murmur grew into a chorus. Frustration rippled through the rows. Some passengers began pulling out their phones, recording from different angles. The air buzzed with indignation. Karen tried to shout over them. "This is not a debate. Crew authority is final." But her voice was drowned out by the collective noise of passengers who no longer accepted silence. Selina's heart pounded, but she remained seated, shoulders back, face calm. She tapped her journal 3 times, her private rhythm, her tether to composure. Inside, her chest burned with the ache of humiliation, but she refused to let it break her. Emily turned her phone toward Selina and whispered, "Do you want to say something to the stream? There are over 50,000 people watching now." Selina's instinct was to decline, to keep her words private. But then she looked around at the cabin, at the passengers whose courage had grown from her refusal to yield. She thought of the countless faces beyond the phone screen, people who had lived this story in silence. She nodded slightly. Emily held the phone steady. Selina's voice was soft, measured, but it carried with the weight of truth. This is not about a seat. This is about the dignity every person deserves when they step onto a plane, into a classroom, into a boardroom. You can question my ticket, but you cannot question my humanity. The cabin fell silent, reverent, as her words settled like stones in still water. Karen stood frozen, her authority fractured. Lindsay shifted uneasily, lips parted as though she might finally speak. But no words came. The older officer looked at Selina with quiet respect, then turned to Karen. "We're not removing her. Not under these circumstances." Gasps of relief rippled. Someone clapped, then another, until applause spread unevenly through the cabin. Karen's face burned crimson. She barked into the interphone, her voice rising with desperation. "Captain, we need a resolution now. The crew is losing control of the cabin." But the truth was plain for everyone to see. Control hadn't been lost. It had been reclaimed by the very passenger she had tried to humiliate. Selina sat still, palms resting on her journal, her breathing steady. The humiliation still throbbed inside her, but it had transformed into something stronger, something unbreakable. She whispered only to herself, "Strength is quiet." Yet even as she said it, she knew this was only the beginning. The real reckoning had yet to arrive. The interphone crackled, and Karen's sharp voice echoed faintly from the galley. The cabin buzzed with restless murmurs, passengers shifting in their seats, eyes darting between Selina Carter and the closed cockpit door. Then, unexpectedly, the forward cabin door opened again. This time, it wasn't just another crew member stepping inside. A tall man in a tailored suit, his presence commanding without a word, entered the first-class cabin. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his jaw set with quiet authority. He wasn't in uniform, but every detail of his appearance carried weight. A hush spread through the cabin as though everyone instinctively understood that someone important had arrived. Karen froze mid-sentence, her eyes widening before she schooled her expression back into practiced control. Lindsay Harper looked pale, her hands twitching nervously at her sides. Even the security officers straightened, suddenly more alert. The man's voice was steady, resonant. "What seems to be the issue here?" Karen recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Mr. Lowell Richard, I didn't realize you were on board." Gasps rippled among the passengers. Emily Zhao's livestream comments erupted. "Is that the CEO? Oh my God, it's him. This is huge. Richard Lowell, CEO of Meridian Airlines," nodded once. His eyes moved across the cabin, briefly meeting the eyes of the passengers before settling firmly on Selina. His brow furrowed ever so slightly. Karen rushed into explanation, her words tumbling out. "We have a passenger refusing to comply with verification. She wouldn't step out with security. She's disrupted the boarding process, and we cannot proceed without addressing it." Richard's gaze flicked to Selina, then back to Karen. And what exactly required verification? Karen hesitated. "Well, her ticket, it flagged a discrepancy. We just needed to confirm she belongs in this section." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew what those words meant. Richard looked directly at Selina. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, recognition flickering in his eyes. His jaw tightened. "Dr. Carter," he asked softly, almost like a statement more than a question. Selina inclined her head slightly. Her voice was calm. "Yes." Karen blinked, glancing quickly between them. You know her?" Richard's expression hardened. "Every person in this company should know her." The passengers stirred, murmurs rising. Emily's livestream exploded with comments. "What does he mean? Who is she? This is unreal." Karen's composure cracked, panic flickering across her face. "I was just following procedure. She refused to comply. I had no choice." Richard's voice cut like steel. "You had a choice. You had the choice to treat her with dignity. You had the choice to respect a paying passenger, and you failed." The words landed like thunder in the cabin. Lindsay's lips parted, as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Selina sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her journal, her gaze calm but unflinching. Inside, her heart beat hard against her ribs, but outwardly she gave nothing away. Karen stammered, her voice trembling now. "Mr. Lowell." If I had known Richard's glare silenced her. That is precisely the problem. You think dignity depends on recognition, that respect is conditional. It is not. Gas spread again. Several passengers clapped softly, their support growing louder with each exchange. Selina finally spoke, her voice low, but carrying. "I asked for nothing more than to remain in the seat I was assigned." That was treated as defiance. Richard nodded once, his expression grave. He turned to the security officers. "Stand down. She is not to be touched." The older officer gave a small nod of relief. The younger one exhaled heavily, as though a weight had been lifted. Karen took a step forward, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Lowell, I was only doing my job." "No," Richard replied coldly. "You were abusing it." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the distant hum of the engines. Then, in full view of the cabin, Richard turned to Lindsay. "And you were part of this." Lindsay's face went pale. I followed Karen's lead." "That's not good enough," Richard said. His voice remained calm, but it carried finality. "Both of you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Step off this aircraft." The passengers erupted in murmurs, some clapping, some gasping. Emily's phone shook in her hands as she whispered into the stream. "He just fired them. Right here, in front of everyone." Karen's face drained of color. "You can't." "I can," Richard interrupted. "And I have." Security moved closer, not to Selina, but to Karen and Lindsay. For the first time that evening, the tables had turned. Selina sat quietly, still, her composure intact. Yet inside, a storm of emotions surged: vindication, exhaustion, sorrow that it had come to this. She whispered softly under her breath, "Strength is quiet." Richard glanced back at her, his eyes filled with something between respect and regret. "Dr. Carter, on behalf of this airline, I apologize." Selina inclined her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Apologies are words. Dignity requires action." The passengers applauded, louder now, their support ringing through the cabin. Karen and Lindsay were escorted toward the door, their protests swallowed by the noise. Emily's live stream soared past 100,000 viewers. Comments poured in. History unfolding. Justice. Finally. This is bigger than one flight. Selina closed her journal, resting her hand on the cover as though sealing the moment. Her face remained serene, but inside she felt the shift the storm had broken, and now the world was watching. The first-class cabin was alive with murmurs as Karen and Lindsay disappeared through the forward door, their protests silenced by the finality of the CEO's command. Passengers leaned into each other, whispering, speculating, recording. The tension that had weighed on everyone for nearly an hour was finally cracking, replaced with something new: anticipation. Richard Lowell stood tall in the aisle, his presence steady, though his jaw was clenched tight. He turned to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. The matter has been resolved. We will continue our journey shortly." Applause rose, scattered but strong. Emily Zhao caught the moment on her phone, her voice trembling as she whispered to her live stream, "They're gone. He fired them right in front of us." Selina Carter remained seated in 2A, hands folded neatly on her journal, eyes calm but unreadable. Though vindication should have brought her relief, she felt only exhaustion pressing against her ribs. She had not asked for this storm, yet it had chosen her all the same. Richard's gaze turned back to her. His voice dropped, quieter, meant only for her but still loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "Dr. Carter, again. I apologize. This should never have happened." Selina met his eyes. "Apologies are easy. Mr. Lowell, change is harder." The passengers stirred at her words. Even those who didn't know who she was felt the weight behind them. Richard hesitated, then nodded. "You're right." He paused, taking a steadying breath. "Perhaps it's time they all knew who you are." Selina's heart tightened. She had chosen anonymity for this trip, traveling simply as another passenger, avoiding the spotlight that so often preceded her. But now, with the world already watching through Emily's live stream, hiding was no longer an option. She exhaled softly, her decision made. Richard turned toward the passengers. His voice carried across the cabin, firm and resonant. "For those who don't know, Dr. Selina Carter is not just a valued passenger. She is also the majority shareholder of Meridian Airlines." Gas erupted, followed by a stunned silence. The businessman across the aisle dropped his pen. The couple in row 3 exchanged wide-eyed glances. Emily's phone nearly slipped from her hand as her livestream comments exploded. "What, she owns the airline? This is unreal." Selina sat still, her face composed, though her chest burned with conflicting emotions. She hadn't wanted it revealed this way. Yet there was a strange liberation in the truth finally stepping into the light. A voice from the back called out, half in disbelief, half in awe. "She owns the airline." Richard nodded. More than anyone else in this room. And yet, she was treated as if she did not belong. The truth rippled through the cabin like a wave, shock colliding with admiration. Phones were lifted higher, flashes blinking as passengers documented the moment. Selina finally rose from her seat, her movements unhurried, graceful, every detail deliberate. She stood in the aisle, facing the passengers who had become witnesses to her ordeal. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Identity should never have been the issue. Whether I was a shareholder or a stranger, whether I was someone important in your eyes or simply another traveler, I deserved respect. Dignity should not be conditional. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with reflection. Even the hum of the engine seemed muted in the wake of her words. Emily whispered into her phone, her voice trembling. "She's right. Everyone is saying it online. This isn't about her power. It's about the way she was treated before anyone knew." Selina continued, her gaze sweeping across the cabin. "You all saw what happened. You all heard the words used against me. How quickly assumptions were made. How swiftly humiliation was justified as procedure. And yet, here we are, only now acknowledging my worth because of a title, a position, a share of ownership." Her words struck deep. Passengers shifted uneasily, guilt mixing with admiration. Selina's eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. What if I had not been who I am? What if I had been a teacher, a nurse, a student traveling for the first time? Would I have been dragged from this plane? Would the world have shrugged and moved on? No one answered, but the silence was answer enough. Richard's face was grave, his head bowed slightly. "You're right, and it's unacceptable." Selina closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them, her voice lower, more intimate now. "Dignity is not optional. It is the baseline. Without it, there is no trust, no safety, no humanity in the service we offer one another." The applause started softly, one pair of hands clapping near the back, then another, then swelling until the cabin echoed with it. Passengers clapped not just for her survival of the ordeal, but for the truth she had spoken on behalf of so many unseen. Emily's phone captured every second. Her live stream soared past 200,000 viewers. Comments rolled in faster than the screen could display them. "She's speaking for all of us. Chills. This is history." Selina remained standing a moment longer, then sat again, folding her journal across her lap. She whispered under her breath, "Strength is quiet." But this time, the quiet strength had spoken loud enough for the world to hear. Richard straightened, his voice firm. "This airline will not only apologize, we will take action. I'll make sure of it." Selina nodded slightly. "Words into deeds, Mr. Lowell. That is the measure." The businessman across the aisle leaned closer, his voice low but earnest. "I'll never forget this." "None of us will," Emily whispered to her camera. "She just changed everything." Selina closed her eyes briefly, exhaustion pulling at her, but inside she felt a quiet certainty. The ordeal had been cruel, humiliating, but it had also cracked something open, a truth that could no longer be ignored, and she knew this was only the beginning. The plane was still on the ground, the engines humming at idle. Though the threat of removal had passed, the cabin had not yet returned to normal. The passengers sat in a hush of disbelief, their eyes fixed on Selina Carter as though she were both victim and victor. Richard Lowell, standing firm in the aisle, gave his final command to the security officers. "Escort Ms. Whitmore and Ms. Harper off the aircraft. They are no longer crew for this airline." The older officer nodded with relief. The younger one exhaled, almost grateful that his role in this storm had ended without violence. Together, they guided Karen Whitmore and Lindsay Harper through the forward door. Their faces were pale, lips pressed tight. The authority they had wielded moments ago shattered in front of a cabin full of witnesses. A ripple of applause followed them out, not mocking, not triumphant, simply final, like a chapter closing. Richard turned back toward the cabin, his voice calm but commanding, carried to every row. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will be continuing this flight shortly. Please know, what happened here tonight will not be forgotten by this airline. I will personally see to that." The passengers clapped again, louder this time. Emily Zhao's live stream caught it all, her voice trembling as she narrated. "He's promising action. This is bigger than any one of us." Selina sat quietly in 2A, her journal resting on her lap. Though vindication should have filled her with relief, a heaviness remained in her chest. She hadn't wanted a spectacle. She hadn't wanted hundreds of thousands of strangers watching her fight for the dignity that should have been hers without question. Her thoughts twisted, weary but sharp. What will they remember tomorrow that I owned the airline, or that I was humiliated before I revealed it? Will they see my strength, or only the spectacle? She closed her eyes for a moment, pressing her palm against the journal's worn cover. The familiar rhythm of tapping once, twice, 3 times kept her centered. The businessman across the aisle leaned closer, his voice low but warm. "You were extraordinary. The way you stayed calm, I don't know how you did it." Selina gave him a faint smile. "Calm is a choice, sometimes the only one left." His brow furrowed, thoughtful. "I've been on hundreds of flights. I've seen disagreements, delays, arguments, but this will stay with me, because it wasn't just about you. It was about all of us." Selina nodded. "That's always the point. Dignity denied to one is dignity denied to all." The words lingered in the air between them. Emily Zhao, her phone still raised, whispered excitedly, "Doctor Carter, there are nearly 300,000 people watching right now. The comments are, they're calling this a turning point. People are sharing their own stories. She swallowed, eyes wide. It's like a movement in real time. Selina looked at her, the corners of her lips softening. Good. Maybe that's the only way change ever happens. One humiliation turned into something larger than itself. Richard approached again, crouching slightly so his voice would not carry too far. Dr. Carter, I know tonight was unforgivable, but I promise you, this will not die here. We will issue a formal statement. There will be reform. I will personally oversee it. Selina regarded him quietly, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Promises are easy at 30,000 feet. What matters is what you do when the wheels touch the ground. Richard inclined his head, accepting the rebuke. You have my word, and I know that alone isn't enough. But it's a start. The engines whirred louder. The announcement chime dinging overhead. A replacement purser stepped into the cabin, her eyes wide with nerves as she addressed the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are preparing for departure. Selina leaned back in her seat at last, fastening her belt with calm deliberation. The journal remained on her lap, her hand resting protectively over it. Around her, the passengers settled in, though the air buzzed with the electric charge of everything that had transpired. The plane began to roll, and through the window, Selina watched the runway lights blur past. Yet even as the aircraft lifted into the night sky, she knew the real flight, the one that mattered, was only beginning. Inside her, exhaustion battled with resolve. She whispered to herself, too softly for anyone else to hear. Strength is quiet. But tonight, quiet strength had roared across the world. As the plane climbed higher, Emily Zhao typed furiously on her phone, sharing clips from the live stream that had now gone viral. Passengers whispered to each other, their words tinged with awe. Richard sat silently in the galley, already drafting statements in his head, calculating the scale of the storm that would await them upon landing. And Selina Carter sat in 2A, serene, unbending, knowing that when the world looked back on this night, they would see more than a woman humiliated. They would see a woman who stood like a mountain. The wheels touched down on the runway with a jolt that seemed louder than usual. Passengers stirred awake, stretching, gathering belongings. But in first class, no one moved right away. The weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air, and every glance toward seat 2A carried the memory of a night that had already become more than a flight. Selina Carter sat upright, her journal still resting in her lap. Her hand brushed lightly over the cover. The familiar rhythm of tapping once, twice, 3 times grounding her as the aircraft slowed. She looked out the window at the runway lights, calm on the surface, though inside her chest beat with a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. Emily Zhao was still glued to her phone. Dr. Carter, she whispered, there are over 500,000 viewers now. The hashtags are everywhere your name, the flight number, even phrases like dignity in 2A. It's trending in every time zone. Selina offered her a small, weary smile. It was never about me. Let's hope they remember that. The businessman across the aisle leaned closer. People will remember. You turned humiliation into something none of us will forget. That matters. Selina nodded faintly, her eyes distant. She wondered how many stories like hers had gone unseen, unrecorded, unvindicated. How many voices had been silenced with the same word compliance? The chime rang overhead, the flight attendant's voice steady though tinged with nerves. Ladies and gentlemen, Welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. Please remain seated until we arrive at the gate. As the aircraft taxied, Selena's phone buzzed repeatedly in her bag. Messages from colleagues, friends, even journalists. She ignored them all, her focus fixed inward. When the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign dinged off, the usual scramble to stand was replaced by hesitation. Passengers looked toward Selena, waiting. Some pulled out their phones again, ready to capture whatever might happen next. Richard Lowell appeared at her side. His voice was quiet, almost deferential. "Dr. Carter, security will escort you through the terminal. The media is already here." Selena closed her journal and placed it carefully in her bag. "Then let's go," she said simply. As she rose, the cabin broke into applause. It wasn't the polite clapping that usually followed a smooth landing. It was something deeper, rawer, an acknowledgement of what she had endured and what she represented. Selena inclined her head slightly in gratitude, but said nothing. Emily whispered behind her phone, "She's walking off now. Everyone's clapping. This is history." The forward door opened, and Selena stepped into the jet bridge. The air felt cooler, charged. Outside, flashes already erupted. Journalists crowded beyond the barrier, microphones raised, voices shouting questions all at once. "Dr. Carter, how does it feel to be humiliated on your own airline? What changes will you demand? Do you plan to fire more staff?" Selena paused, the cameras capturing her every breath. She wanted to retreat, to disappear into silence, but she knew too well that silence had protected the wrong people for too long. She raised her chin slightly, her voice calm and steady. "Tonight was not about me. It was about a culture that allows dignity to be questioned at 30,000 feet. That ends now." The flashes intensified, reporters pressing forward. Richard raised his hands to hold them back, but Selena's voice carried above the noise. "This airline will not just apologize. We will reform. Protocols will change. Training will deepen, and every employee will understand that respect is not optional, it is required." Her words struck like iron. Even in the chaos, the journalists stilled, scribbling furiously, their cameras recording every syllable. Selena moved forward, guided by security, but her calm declaration echoed long after she passed. By the time she reached the terminal lounge, her phone had already exploded with notifications. News outlets were running headlines. Black woman CEO humiliated on her own airline. Majority shareholder escorted through chaos. After first-class incident. Dignity in 2A. Viral showdown sparks industry reckoning. Emily Zhao's live stream replay had crossed 2 million views. Her quiet commentary, "She's right. Dignity shouldn't be conditional," was being quoted by influencers and journalists alike. Selena settled into a private lounge room where the noise of the crowd dulled. She dropped her bag gently onto the chair beside her, then sat with her journal in her lap. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to exhale deeply. Her thoughts tumbled in waves. She had won the battle in the cabin. She had survived humiliation without bending. But what came next mattered more than applause or headlines. What came next would determine whether this night was just a spectacle or the beginning of something lasting. Richard entered quietly, closing the door behind him. His face was drawn, weary. "The board is already calling. The press is relentless. We need to respond immediately." Selena's eyes lifted to meet his. Her voice was soft, but it carried finality. "Then listen carefully. The response is not a press release. It is a mandate." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "Tell me what you want." Selena opened her journal, flipping to a blank page. She wrote 3 words in neat, deliberate strokes: the Carter Protocol. She slid the journal across the table toward him. It begins with accountability. Every incident reported, every complaint tracked, every crew member retrained. Transparency, not cover-ups. Equity, not excuses. And a guarantee that dignity is treated as a matter of safety, because without it, no one is truly safe in the skies. Richard studied the words, his jaw tight. The board will resist. They'll say it's too much. Then remind them who holds the largest share. Selina replied calmly. Remind them who makes this airline possible. For the first time all night. Richard allowed himself a faint smile. You're not just saving face. You're reshaping the company. Selina's eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. Not just the company, the industry. If we don't set the standard, then all the humiliation, the pain was wasted, and I refuse to waste it. Silence filled the room, heavy with resolve. Richard nodded slowly, understanding that the storm had grown larger than any of them could control. Selina leaned back in her chair, her hand resting on her journal. Her whisper was nearly inaudible, yet it anchored her to the very core of her being. Strength is quiet, but tonight, her quiet strength had spoken louder than any roar, and the world was already listening. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass walls of Meridian Airlines headquarters in Los Angeles, but the air inside the executive boardroom was anything but warm. The long oak table stretched like a battlefield, lined with board members, lawyers, and advisors. At the head sat Richard Lowell, his face drawn from a sleepless night. Beside him, calm as ever, was the doctor, Selina Carter. She had traded her simple travel clothes for a navy suit, understated but commanding. Her journal lay open in front of her, pen poised, though she had already written the words that anchored this meeting, the Carter Protocol. The chatter in the room quieted as Selina lifted her gaze. Her voice, soft but steady, cut through the silence. Last night, 500,000 people watched as your airline failed the most basic test dignity. Today, millions more know. The question before you is not whether you will respond, but how. A director cleared his throat. Dr. Carter, with respect, the incident was regrettable, but public sentiment changes quickly. A well-crafted statement, some training modules, a public apology. These things usually suffice. Selina's eyes sharpened. Suffice for whom? For passengers who continue to be humiliated, for employees who never learn better, or for shareholders worried about headlines fading by next quarter. The director shifted uncomfortably. Selina leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but unyielding. This is not about smoothing a scandal. This is about rebuilding trust. And that begins with accountability. Richard cleared his throat. Backing her. She's right. We can't paper over this. The brand is already defined by last night's live stream. If we don't act boldly, the story doesn't fade, it festers. Another board member, a woman in a gray blazer, raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does this Carter Protocol entail? Selina turned a page in her journal, her handwriting neat, deliberate. She read aloud. First, transparency. Every complaint, every allegation of discrimination or abuse will be logged and reviewed by an independent panel, not buried in bureaucracy. Second, training. Not a half-hour online slideshow, but comprehensive, ongoing programs rooted in empathy, equity, and accountability. Third, consequences. Employees who violate dignity protocols face immediate suspension pending investigation, with termination for repeat or egregious offenses. The room was tense, board members exchanging glances. Fourth, she continued, her tone steady. Passenger rights. Every traveler will have access to a clear reporting system, visible and accessible during every flight. Incidents will be escalated directly to senior management within hours, not months. Fifth, cultural change. We incentivize respect. Bonuses tied not just to efficiency or profit, but to passenger dignity metrics. Because what we reward, we reinforce. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. This, she said finally, is the Carter Protocol. Not a suggestion, a mandate. The room erupted in murmurs. One director shook his head. This is too radical. The cost alone. Selina cut him off gently but firmly. The cost of silence is higher. Ask any company that ignored systemic abuse until it destroyed them. Ask any family who buried a loved one because dignity was treated as optional. If you're worried about money, remember this markets punish cowardice faster than they punish courage. And right now, the world is watching. Richard hid a faint smile behind his clasped hands. Another director leaned forward, skeptical. And if we resist? If the board rejects this protocol, Selina's gaze held his, calm and unwavering. Then I activate the clause in my shares. I call an emergency vote of no confidence, and I reshape this company without you. The silence that followed was electric. No one doubted she would do it. Finally, Richard broke the tension. She's right. We need this. Not just for damage control, but for survival. The Carter Protocol is not a burden. It's our lifeline. The boardroom shifted. Some nodded reluctantly. Others sat rigid. But the current had changed. Selina could feel it. She leaned back, her hand resting lightly on her journal. This airline doesn't just sell seats. It sells trust. Last night, trust was broken. If we don't rebuild it, we don't deserve to fly. Her words landed like a gavel. Within hours, a press conference was announced. Journalists crowded into the atrium of headquarters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Selina stepped onto the stage beside Richard, her presence calm but commanding. The air buzzed with anticipation. Richard spoke first, offering the formal apology. What happened last night was unacceptable. To Dr. Carter, to every passenger, and to everyone who watched it should never have occurred. It will not happen again. Then he turned, stepping aside. Dr. Carter will explain the reforms we are implementing immediately. Selina stepped to the podium. For a moment she looked out at the sea of cameras, lights, and expectant faces. She felt the weight of millions watching. Her chest tightened, but she steadied herself with her familiar rhythm once, twice, 3 taps of her finger against the podium. Her voice, when it came, was soft but resolute. What happened to me was not new. It has happened to countless others who did not have the platform I do. The only difference is that this time, the world was watching. The crowd leaned in, the clicks of cameras slowing. We will not allow it to happen again. Today we are launching the Carter Protocol. Transparency, training, consequences, passenger rights, cultural change, dignity at the center of everything we do. Her words flowed with quiet power, each syllable deliberate. This is not about me. This is about every person who has been told they do not belong. Every passenger who has been humiliated into silence. Let this airline be the one that says never again. Applause thundered through the atrium, reporters rising to their feet. Emily Zhao's live stream, still running, captured the moment as comments poured in. Goosebumps. This is history. Finally, real change. Selina stepped back from the podium, her chest tight but her face serene. She had done what she came to do, not just survive humiliation, but turn it into a seed of transformation. As she left the stage, Richard leaned close. "You just rewrote the future of this airline," Selina whispered, almost to herself. "Strength is quiet, but today," her quiet strength had spoken loud enough for the world to hear. 6 months had passed since the night in Seat 2A, and yet the world had not forgotten. What began as a humiliating confrontation on a single flight had rippled outward, reshaping not only Meridian Airlines but the entire industry. Headlines that once blared outrage now carried words like reform, accountability, trust restored. The Carter Protocol had become more than a corporate policy. It was a cultural shift, studied in business schools, cited by advocacy groups, and adopted by airlines across continents. Meridian's internal numbers told the story plainly. Passenger satisfaction scores had climbed higher than at any point in the airline's history. Complaints of discriminatory treatment had dropped by nearly 80%. A new reporting app, visible on every passenger's screen, funneled issues directly to senior management, bypassing the layers of bureaucracy that once buried them. Employees who had once resisted now spoke openly about how training and empathy had reshaped the way they saw their role not just as attendants of safety, but guardians of dignity. And through it all, Selina Carter remained a steady presence, never loud, never performative. She continued to travel often, sometimes in first class, sometimes in coach, quietly observing, quietly testing the systems she had demanded into existence. On a crisp autumn morning, she boarded a flight from New York to Chicago. No cameras followed her now. No viral live stream trailed her steps. To most passengers, she was simply another traveler, a woman with a worn leather journal tucked into her bag. And that was how she liked it. As she settled into her seat, a young flight attendant approached. His voice was calm, his smile warm. "Dr. Carter, welcome aboard. Just wanted to say it's an honor. I joined Meridian 3 months ago. The Carter Protocol was part of our training. It changed how I see this job." Selina inclined her head, her eyes soft. "Thank you. Just remember, it isn't about the name. It's about the people you serve." The attendant nodded, sincerity in his eyes. "I know. But still, thank you for giving us a standard worth living up to." He moved down the aisle, and Selina leaned back in her seat, her hand resting on her journal. A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes carried the weight of memory. She thought of that night Karen's sharp voice, the humiliation that clawed at her, the temptation to yield. She thought of Emily Zhao, the passenger whose live stream had turned humiliation into a global reckoning. She thought of Richard Lowell, standing in the aisle, making the choice to side with dignity over protocol. Most of all, she thought of the countless unseen travelers who would never know her name, but who would walk onto flights and be treated with respect because she had once refused to leave her seat. Her inner voice whispered, as it always did, "Strength is quiet." And yet, she knew now, quiet strength could echo across the world. The plane took off, the city shrinking beneath them, the clouds parting like a new horizon. Selina opened her journal and wrote slowly, deliberately, dignity is the baseline. Without it, nothing else matters. With it, everything else is possible. When she looked up, the cabin was calm. Passengers chatted softly. Attendants moved with unhurried grace. It was not perfection. Human beings would always stumble, but it was different. She could feel it. At cruising altitude, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an article from an international paper, European Carriers Adopt Carter Protocol as Industry Standard. Another headline below it read, Hospitals and Hotels Study Airline Reform for Broader Application. Selina exhaled. her chest tight with something between pride and sorrow. Change was never complete, but it had begun. The businessman from that night she had learned his name was Thomas Green, had emailed her weeks later. He had written, "I teach my daughter that dignity is not a gift. It is her right. I learned that from you." Emily Zhao had become a household name. Her livestream turned documentary earning awards. Yet when she met Selena again for coffee in New York, she had said simply, "I just held up a phone. You carried the storm." Selena had smiled faintly. Sometimes that's all it takes, two people refusing to be silent. And Richard Lowell. He had become both ally and student. The Carter Protocol had saved his airline, but it had also humbled him. He often reminded his executives, "We don't sell flights, we sell trust, and trust begins with dignity." As the plane glided smoothly through the clouds, Selena rested her head back against the seat. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something close to peace. She did not think of herself as a hero. She did not think of herself as a symbol. She thought only of the truth that had carried her through humiliation to transformation, that dignity is not negotiable, not conditional, not optional. It is the quiet foundation on which everything else is built. When the flight landed in Chicago, Selena was among the first to disembark. She walked calmly through the terminal, unnoticed by most, just another traveler, and that, in its own way, was the greatest victory of all, that she could simply exist, without question, without spectacle, with dignity intact. Her journal remained tucked under her arm, the words inside marking the journey not just of one woman, but of an entire industry forced to reckon with itself. As she stepped out into the crisp autumn air, she whispered the words once more, her mantra, her truth. Strength is quiet. And in the silence that followed, the world seemed to listen. Dignity. That's what this story has always been about. A woman humiliated in public, yet strong enough to turn her silence into a storm. Dr. Selena Carter's stand on that plane became more than a moment, it became a movement. Her story reminds us that respect should never depend on appearance, status, or recognition. It is a right, not a privilege, and when dignity is denied, injustice thrives. But when someone refuses to yield, when someone says enough, change becomes possible. The Carter Protocol didn't just transform one airline. It redefined an entire industry. As you reflect on this journey, ask yourself, how often have we looked away when dignity was stripped from someone else? How often have we let silence cover injustice? This story is not only hers, it belongs to all of us. And it asks each of us to do better, to see clearer, to act braver. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Because together, by listening, remembering, and demanding change, we can make sure that dignity is never optional.